These food storage secrets helped millions of soldiers survive the hell of World War II. You can't even imagine the ingenious ways soldiers on the front lines, where there were no refrigerators or stores, invented to preserve food. In conditions where spoiled food meant hunger or disease, soldiers' ingenuity created real miracles of preservation. These methods were born out of desperation and necessity, but their effectiveness was tested by the harshest test of all, war. Each technique was hard-won in the trenches and dugouts, where every piece of bread counted. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ordinary salt was turned into a universal preservative, and a hole in the ground became a refrigerator that worked better than modern devices. What if I told you that salt was more important than gold? Salt was a soldier's first and foremost ally in the fight to preserve food. This white crystalline powder turned any meat into a product that could be stored for months without any refrigeration. Soldiers of all armies knew this ancient secret and applied it with mathematical precision. The process of salting meat was simple but required strict adherence to proportions. For every kilogram of meat, at least 200 grams of coarse salt was required. The meat was cut into strips no more than 3 centimeters thick, so that the salt could penetrate deep into the tissue. Each piece of meat was thoroughly rubbed with salt on all sides. The salt drew moisture out of the tissue, creating an environment in which bacteria simply could not multiply. It was the most reliable method of preservation known to mankind for thousands of years. The salted meat was placed in wooden boxes or metal containers, with each layer sprinkled with additional salt. After a few days, the meat released juice, which mixed with the salt to form a concentrated brine. This brine provided additional protection against spoilage. Properly salted meat could be stored for up to 6 months, even in the hottest conditions. Before consumption, it had to be soaked in water for several hours to remove excess salt. This meat became the basis for soups and stews. Soldiers also used salt to preserve fish and vegetables. Cabbage salted in barrels turned into sauerkraut, a source of vitamin C that prevented scurvy. This was especially important during long sieges or campaigns. Salt was so important that its supplies were guarded as strictly as ammunition. The loss of salt meant inevitable food problems in the near future. Experienced quartermasters always kept a double supply of this precious preservative. This method did not require any complex technology or special equipment. Salt and the right technique were all a soldier needed to create long-term food supplies. Its simplicity and effectiveness made salting a universal solution for all conditions. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Do you agree that simple methods are often the most reliable? Ready to learn a secret that will change your perception of food storage? When technology failed, soldiers turned to the earth itself for help. The underground cellar or earth refrigerator was an ingenious invention that used the natural properties of the soil to maintain a low temperature. This method worked in any season and in any climate. The secret was that at a depth of just 1.5 meters, the temperature of the earth remains constant throughout the year. In summer, it is significantly lower than the air temperature, and in winter, it is above freezing. This natural feature turned a simple pit into an effective refrigerator. Soldiers dug a pit 1 to 2 meters deep, depending on the type of soil and climatic conditions. The walls of the pit were reinforced with boards, stones, or any other available material. This prevented the soil from crumbling and protected the food from direct contact with the ground. The bottom of the pit was lined with straw, dry leaves, or cloth. This layer served as additional insulation and absorbed excess moisture. Food was placed in wooden boxes or wrapped in cloth to protect it from rodents and insects. The lid of such a cellar was a key element of the structure. It was made of thick boards and additionally insulated with earth or turf. The thickness of the earth layer on the lid had to be at least 30 centimeters for effective thermal insulation. Ventilation was no less important than insulation. Small holes were made in the lid or walls of the pit and covered with mesh or cloth. This ensured air circulation and prevented the accumulation of moisture, which could spoil the food. In such an earthen refrigerator, meat could be stored for several weeks and vegetables for months. Root vegetables, such as potatoes and carrots, remained fresh until spring. Dairy products in clay pots also remained edible for much longer. This method required only physical strength and the simplest tools. A shovel, an axe, and a few boards were all that was needed to create an effective storage system. In conditions of stationary defense, such cellars were built first. Soldiers often set up entire underground warehouses where they stored not only food, but also medicines, ammunition, and other valuable items. The earth protected against temperature fluctuations, humidity, and even shrapnel. The earthen refrigerator proved that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. It worked without electricity, did not require fuel, and could function for years with minimal maintenance. Did you know that ordinary animal fat could be turned into the perfect packaging for meat? Ready to learn how lard became a real preservative? You'll be shocked when you learn about this unique method. Animal fat was not just a source of calories for hungry soldiers, it became a real protective capsule for meat. This ancient method of preservation, perfected by military necessity, turned ordinary layered into airtight packaging that could keep meat fresh for months. The principle behind this method was based on creating an airtight barrier around the product. When the hot fat solidified, it formed a thick crust that completely isolated the meat from the air. Without access to oxygen, bacteria could not multiply, and the decay process stopped. The process began with melting fat from lard or bones. The fat was slowly heated in a pot until it melted completely, carefully straining it through a cloth to remove all impurities. Pure fat was the key to successful preservation, as any meat residue could cause spoilage. The meat was pre-cooked, fried, boiled, or stewed until fully cooked. This was important because raw meat and fat could spoil from the inside. The cooked meat had to cool completely before being immersed in fat to avoid condensation. The prepared meat was tightly packed into clay pots or metal containers. Then it was completely covered with hot, but not boiling, fat. The fat had to cover the meat with a layer of at least 2 centimeters on all sides, leaving no air bubbles. After cooling, the fat turned into a dense white mass that reliably sealed the contents. For additional protection, another thin layer of fresh fat was often poured on top. The container was covered with a lid and stored in a cool place. Meat preserved in this way could be stored for up to a year without losing its quality. When the jar was opened, the fat was carefully removed and the meat underneath was fresh and fragrant. The fat itself could also be used for cooking. This method was especially popular among French soldiers, who used it to preserve goose meat and pâté. They created real delicacies that could be stored in the field for a long time without refrigeration. For soldiers, this method was the perfect combination of practicality and nutrition. The fat provided the calories needed for hard physical work, and the meat provided protein. It was a complete meal in a compact package. The technology required only basic cooking skills and minimal equipment. A pot for rendering fat and containers for storage were all a soldier needed. Its simplicity and accessibility made this method a universal solution for field conditions. Want to know the main secret to long-term meat storage? Smoke was one of the most effective natural preservatives known to mankind. Soldiers quickly mastered the art of smoking, turning simple campfires into smokehouses capable of preserving meat for months. This method not only extended the shelf life, but also gave the products a unique taste and aroma. The secret of smoking lay in the chemicals contained in wood smoke. Formaldehyde, phenols, and organic acids penetrated the meat, creating a protective barrier against bacteria. At the same time, the smoke dehydrated the product, depriving microorganisms of the moisture necessary for life. Soldiers built simple smokehouses from materials at hand. The basis was a pit about 1 meter deep, connected by a trench to a hearth. Smoke from smoldering coals passed through this trench and rose into the smoking chamber, where the product was hung. The choice of wood was critical to the quality of the smoking process. Hardwoods such as oak, beech, alder, or fruit trees were best suited. Conifers could not be used because of their resin content, which gave the meat a bitter taste and could be harmful. The temperature in the smokehouse had to be kept between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius for cold smoking. This was achieved by using a small amount of charcoal and carefully controlling the draft. Too high a temperature could cook the meat instead of preserving it. The smoking process required patience and constant attention. The meat was hung on hooks or laid out on racks made of branches. The product had to be in the smoke continuously for 3 to 7 days, depending on the size of the pieces and the desired degree of preservation. Properly smoked meat acquired a characteristic brown color and dense structure. The surface was covered with a thin protective film that prevented spoilage. Such meat could be stored for several months, even in warm conditions. Not only meat was smoked, but also fish, lard, and even some vegetables. Fish smoked particularly quickly and turned out very tasty. Smoked lard became a valuable source of fat and could be stored for up to a year. To maintain the smoking process, soldiers organized shifts. The smokehouse required constant supervision, especially at night when the fire could go out. Experienced soldiers knew how to maintain the right temperature by adding small portions of charcoal. Smoking was not only a method of preservation, but also a way to improve the taste of monotonous army food. Smoked products diversified the diet and boosted the morale of the soldiers. In the harsh conditions of war, even such a simple pleasure was of great importance. Do you think you could build a smokehouse from materials at hand in the field? Vinegar was one of the most versatile preservatives in a military cook's arsenal. This acidic solution turned ordinary vegetables into long-lasting foods and meat into a delicacy that could last for months without refrigeration. The acidic environment created conditions in which most harmful bacteria simply could not survive. Fermented alcohol was often used as the basis for making vinegar. In wartime conditions, it could be obtained from any sugar-containing products, fruits, vegetables, or even bread. Natural fermentation turns sugar into alcohol and then into acetic acid. The pickling process was simple but required precise proportions. A glass of vinegar and 2 tablespoons of salt were added to a liter of water. This mixture created an environment with an acidity that was lethal to most microorganisms, but safe for humans. Vegetables for pickling were cut into medium-sized pieces and tightly packed into jars or pots. Each layer was sprinkled with salt and spices, bay leaves, pepper, garlic. Spices not only improved the taste, but also had additional preservative properties. The marinade was brought to a boil and poured over the vegetables. The hot solution penetrated the tissue of the product better, ensuring deeper preservation. After pouring, the containers were tightly closed and left to cool and mature. The pickled vegetables were ready to eat after a few days, but their taste only improved over time. They could be stored for months without losing their nutritional properties. This was an important source of vitamins during the winter. Meat was also pickled in vinegar. It was first boiled until cooked, then covered with a sour marinade. The vinegar not only preserved the product, but also made tough meat softer and easier to digest. Soldiers often prepared pickled fish, especially small fish, which could be pickled whole. Fish in vinegar retained all its nutritional properties and acquired a piquant taste. It was a wonderful addition to a monotonous diet. Vinegar was also used to preserve eggs. Fresh eggs were placed in clay pots and covered with a vinegar solution. The acid slightly dissolved the shell, making it permeable to the preservative. Such eggs could be stored for several months. This method was especially valuable because it did not require constant heating or special equipment. Vinegar could be made from local products, and the marinating process itself did not require any special skills. Its simplicity and effectiveness made this method ideal for field conditions. What you are about to learn will change your understanding of Army logistics. Drying was one of the oldest and most reliable methods of preserving food. Soldiers of all armies skillfully used the power of the sun and wind to create light, compact, and long-lasting food supplies. This method did not require any additional ingredients, only time and the right technique. The secret to successful drying was the rapid removal of moisture from the product. Bacteria and mold could not grow in an environment with less than 10% humidity. Properly dried products retain most of their nutrients and could be stored for years. Meat for drying was cut into thin strips no more than a centimeter thick. Thin pieces dried evenly and quickly without spoiling. The meat had to be cut along the grain so that the finished product would be easy to chew. Improvised dryers were built from any available materials. The simplest design was a wooden frame with a rope or wire stretched across it. The meat was hung so that the pieces did not touch each other and were well ventilated by the wind. The drying site was chosen on high ground, where there was a constant wind and plenty of sun. Damp lowlands and enclosed areas were not suitable, as the meat could become moldy before it dried. It was important to protect the product from rain and night dew. The drying process took 3 to 7 days, depending on weather conditions and the thickness of the pieces. The finished meat became dark, tough, and brittle. When bent, it should not release moisture or juice. Vegetables were also perfect for drying. Potatoes, carrots, and onions were cut into thin slices and laid out on cloth or boards. Dried vegetables weighed 10 times less than fresh ones, but retained most of their vitamins and minerals. Dried fruits were especially valuable. Apples, pears, and plums became a concentrated source of sugar and vitamins. They could be eaten as a sweet treat or added to porridge to improve the taste. The finished dried products were packed in bags made of thick fabric or birch bark. It was important to protect them from moisture and rodents. Properly packaged dried goods could be stored in camping conditions for months without losing their quality. For consumption, dried products were often soaked in water or added directly to soup during cooking. They quickly rehydrated and tasted little different from fresh ones. It was an ideal way to create light, nutritious supplies for long trips. Ready to learn how ordinary ash was turned into a powerful preservative? Wood ash was an unexpected but effective aid in preserving food. This gray powder, left over from any campfire, contained alkaline compounds that created an environment unsuitable for bacteria to grow. Soldiers used ash to preserve eggs, meat, and even some vegetables. The principle of ash was based on its high alkalinity. Potassium carbonate and other alkaline salts created an environment with a high pH level in which most harmful microorganisms could not survive. It was a natural antiseptic, available wherever fires were lit. The most famous use of ash was for preserving eggs. Fresh eggs were rolled in dry ash or immersed in an ash solution. The alkali slightly destroyed the pores in the shell, sealing the egg and preventing bacteria from entering. To prepare the ash solution, the ash was sifted through a cloth to remove large particles and charcoal. It was then mixed with water in a ratio of 1:3. The solution had to steep for several hours, after which it was filtered and used for preservation. Meat could also be preserved with ash. Pieces of meat were rolled in dry ash or soaked in an alkaline solution. This method was less popular than salting, but in conditions of salt shortage, it could be a lifesaver. Vegetables treated with an ash solution acquired a characteristic alkaline taste, but could be stored much longer than usual. This method worked especially well with root vegetables, which had a dense structure and absorbed the preservative well. Ash from different types of trees had different properties. Ash from deciduous trees, oak, birch, and ash, was considered the best. Ash from coniferous trees contained resinous substances and was less suitable for preserving food. It was important to use only clean ash from burnt wood. Ash from burning garbage, paper, or other materials could contain harmful substances and was unsuitable for contact with food. The quality of the ash directly affected the safety of the preserved products. Foods treated with ash were stored in dry, cool places. Excess moisture could wash away the alkaline protection and negate the entire effect of preservation. Properly treated foods could be stored for several months without loss of quality. This method was especially valuable because ash was a byproduct of any campfire. Soldiers did not need to carry extra weight or search for special ingredients. Its simplicity and accessibility made ash a universal preservative for field conditions. Winter was a harsh test for soldiers, but it also provided unique opportunities for food storage. Frost turned any place into a natural refrigerator capable of preserving huge food supplies without any energy costs. The ability to use cold correctly was a vital skill for survival in winter conditions. The simplest method was to create ice storage facilities. Soldiers dug deep pits in the ground or snow and poured water over the walls. In the cold, the water turned to ice, creating strong, airtight walls. Such storage facilities could hold tons of food. Meat was frozen in large pieces or whole carcasses. Frozen meat became as hard as stone, but retained all its nutritional properties. When stored properly, it remained fresh until spring, providing a constant source of protein. The freezing technology required speed and proper organization. The meat had to be frozen as soon as possible after the animal was slaughtered, preventing it from spoiling. Slow freezing led to the formation of large ice crystals that destroyed the structure of the meat. The packaging of frozen products was no less important than the freezing itself. The products were wrapped in cloth or skins to protect them from direct contact with the air. This prevented dehydration and preserved the quality of the product even during long-term storage. Special attention was paid to protecting stocks from thaws. A sudden warming could spoil huge stocks in a matter of days. Therefore, ice storage facilities were additionally insulated with snow, straw, or other insulating materials. Defrosting required caution and patience. Rapid defrosting over a fire led to the loss of juices and deterioration of the taste of the meat. It was best to transfer the required amount of food to a warm place in advance, allowing it to thaw slowly. Vegetables also kept well when frozen. Potatoes, carrots, and cabbage turned into ice bricks that could be stored all winter. When thawed, they retained most of their vitamins and nutrients. Soldiers learned to use natural glaciers and snowdrifts. In mountainous areas, they found natural caves filled with ice, which served as ready-made cold storage rooms. Such places could maintain low temperatures even in relatively warm weather. Primitive but effective methods were used to control the temperature in ice storage facilities. Soldiers buried bottles of water in the ice to serve as indicators. If the water in the bottle began to melt, it meant that the temperature was rising and measures needed to be taken. Winter storage was so effective that some units built up reserves for the entire winter at the beginning of the cold season. This required good organization and planning, but it allowed them to survive the harshest months without food shortages. Fermentation was the most difficult but also the most effective way to preserve food in the field. This process used beneficial bacteria to create an acidic environment that prevented the growth of harmful microorganisms. Soldiers mastered the art of controlled fermentation, turning ordinary vegetables into valuable sources of vitamins. The basis of fermentation was lactic acid bacteria, which were naturally present on the surface of many vegetables. Under the right conditions, these bacteria began to multiply actively, converting sugars into lactic acid. The acidic environment stopped decay and created a unique sour taste. Sauerkraut was the most popular fermented product. Cabbage was finely chopped, mixed with salt in a ratio of 20:1, and tightly packed into barrels or pots. The salt drew juice from the cabbage, creating the brine necessary for fermentation. The fermentation process required precise control of conditions. The temperature had to be between 18 and 22 degrees Celsius, and the cabbage had to be constantly covered with brine. Exposure to air led to mold growth and spoilage. After a few days, active fermentation began. The brine foamed and bubbled, giving off a characteristic sour smell. This process continued for about a week, after which the sauerkraut was ready for consumption and long-term storage. Soldiers also fermented carrots, beets, cucumbers, and other vegetables. Each vegetable required its own approach in fermentation time, but the principle remained the same. Fermented vegetables not only stored for a long time, but were also rich in vitamin C, preventing scurvy. Dairy products were also fermented. Milk was used to make sour milk, kefir, and cottage cheese, which could be stored much longer than fresh milk. These products were an important source of protein and calcium in the soldiers' diet. Quality control during fermentation was critically important. Incorrect fermentation could lead to poisoning or spoilage of the entire batch of products. Experienced soldiers knew how to determine whether the process was going correctly by smell and taste. Fermented products often became the basis for other dishes. Sauerkraut was added to soups and stews, improving their taste and nutritional value. Brine was used as a seasoning and even as a remedy for digestive disorders. This method of preservation was especially valuable because it not only preserved food, but also improved its beneficial properties. Fermentation increased the absorption of nutrients and added beneficial probiotics that supported digestive health. We have looked at 9 ingenious ways of storing food that helped millions of soldiers survive during World War II. These methods, from simple salting to complex fermentation, prove that human ingenuity knows no bounds when it comes to survival. Each of these techniques was developed in the trenches and dugouts, where every bite of food could mean the difference between life and death. Soldiers turned the most ordinary materials, salt, ash, smoke, into powerful preservation tools, creating supplies that could feed entire units. This knowledge remains relevant today. In a world where dependence on electricity and refrigerators is growing every day, the ability to preserve food without modern technology can be a vital skill. The simplicity and effectiveness of military methods make them universal for any extreme conditions. Which of these food storage methods did you find most surprising? Have you ever tried canning food at home? Share your experience in the comments and subscribe to our channel to learn more survival secrets from the history of warfare.